Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all on with us today. My name is Cathy Lancaster, and I'm with the Library of Michigan. We are so happy to have Jenifer Strauss here with us today, um, putting on our Stepping Gently Outside Your Comfort Zone webinar. We're lucky to have the Institute of Museum and Library Services support this program. We record webinars with Jen every now and then, and I wanted to make sure that you all got in the chat box um, the links to our handouts, and then at the end of today there'll be a survey, so make sure you fill that out as well, and I'll be resharing these at the end. And I wanted to let you know that we do have some recordings of Jenifer's past webinars on the Library of Michigan's website. So if you go to michigan.gov/Library of Michigan, and then you can search for our webinar archives, you'll see on your screen right here that we have some recordings with Jenifer, Act Out and Play, In a Galaxy Far, Far Away. Of course, that was last year's summer reading theme, was a universe of stories. She's got Full Body Story Time, all sorts of webinars recorded on our site. And we're really happy to have Jenifer here with us. I'm just going to have to unmute her. Give me a second. Sorry. Had to do a forced mute on everybody today. So, should be unmuted, Jen. Nope, not unmuted.
There we go.
Sorry. There you go. Okay, perfect. All right, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
You want to tell everybody about yourself?
I will. So welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm really excited to share ideas with you today, move us very gently out of our comfort zone, which is always a wonderful and healthy thing to do. So I am a storyteller. I'm also a narrative consultant and a coach. So that's a lot, all in one title. But years ago, I started my career as an environmental educator, and I realized that when I told my students stories about how the earth worked, that it helped them understand big ecological concepts better. I went into the classroom and I taught for 10 years. So I taught sixth graders for most of those years and second graders for 2 of those years. And it was a group of sixth graders who were afraid to read and afraid to write who really helped me embrace storytelling. That year, because we could tell our stories out loud to each other, they actually became better writers. They became incredible storytellers. And I saw the power of story bloom in my classroom in such a big way that I decided I wanted to leave that individual classroom and embrace storytelling in a bigger way. Well, that was in 1993. So I'm coming up on 30 years, almost 30 years of this business called Story Be Told. So I hope you'll visit my website and see some of the other things that I offer. But basically what I do is that I help educators and their students, organizations, businesses, and individuals use story, which is our common denominator as human beings, use story to connect with each other, to communicate with each other and their audiences, and to achieve whatever goal it is that they're seeking. And they do that through story. The other job, and where you're viewing me from today, is I am a student success coach at our community college in Traverse City called Northwestern College. So this is my office. Excuse the very disgusting old file cabinet, but it is the best way for me to share with you today is here from my office. So welcome everyone to the webinar. So I want to start today by talking a little bit about brain science and getting out of our comfort zone. My other biggest passion beyond storytelling is brain science, and believe it or not, they go hand in hand. So human beings and the oldest parts of our brain, well, we love to stay comfortable. Our brain, our amygdala part of our brain, loves homeostasis, loves it when things don't change because we feel safe there. In the old days, the only time we needed to leave that homeostasis was if a lion was chasing us, or we needed to go hunt, or put ourselves in a risky situation. And when we had to do that, those were those times when cortisol would surge and adrenaline would surge through our body. We would either go hunt or escape from the lion. And after that event was over, well, our human body would go back to a homeostasis and start producing endorphins and epinephrine again. Most people don't like to be out of their comfort zone for those very old reasons. But we all know that when we push just a little bit beyond where we're comfortable, we tend to grow and learn. And aren't we asking our young patrons in our story times, especially those shy ones, to come out of their comfort zone a little bit, maybe join you in a song, maybe participate in acting out a story, or try a new activity that has to do with writing or motor skills in a brand new way. And some of our little ones are incredibly shy and maybe a little nervous. So we have to be great models for them in our story times by showing them how we can step a little bit outside of our comfort zone, try something new with them. And you know that those young ones are going to love all the energy and all the attention that you're placing upon them when you try new things in your story time. So to drive this point home, I'd like to start today with a story. I also want to let you know that Cathy has included a special link for a handout that you can upload that has all the live links for the things that I'm going to be sharing today. This first story, I'll point out the link that's on our list there. One night, a librarian was working late. Out the window of her office, she heard the beautiful song of the whippoorwill. Now, she had heard about the whippoorwill. She had read about the whippoorwill. She had even done research about that whippoorwill, but she had never seen one live. And so the librarian left her office that night and went outside following that clear and beautiful song. Well, the song of the whippoorwill was so clear. It sounded much closer than it really was. And this librarian was now out in the moonlight following that song and crossing a field, trying to get to the place where she could view that bird. Well, while she was crossing that field, she saw a trail and she thought it would be the easier way to travel because that trail was leading in the right direction and she could hear that whippoorwill chortling a beautiful song. She followed that trail. But it wasn't long and in the moonlight when she looked up and saw Coyote sitting in the middle of that trail. The librarian was afraid at first. We all know about Coyote. She wanted to run, but she was afraid to. And while she was trying to decide what to do, why Coyote looked up at her and said, "Why are you out here? Why are you following me?" Well, the librarian wasn't sure what to tell Coyote. She was afraid to tell him that she was really following the song of a whippoorwill. But before she could answer, Coyote looked up and sneered and said, "Are you following me tonight? Why are you out here?" Well, the librarian looked up and said, "Oh, Coyote, I didn't come out here looking for you. I've seen you before, and I've heard all of your stories. I know about you, Coyote. I came out here tonight because I heard the song of the whippoorwill. Wanted to hear him sing. Wanted to see that, too." Well, this made Coyote incredibly jealous. And he looked at the librarian and said, "Why don't you listen to my night song? I bet you'll really like this one." Well, Coyote lifted up his nose and yodeled out a tune that made the librarian cover her ears. And she said, "Thanks for that song, Coyote. It's a good one. But I better be going, because if I don't hurry, I'm going to miss something that I've always wanted to see." Well, Coyote was really jealous now. And he sneered at that librarian out of the other corner of his mouth and said, "If you don't like my night song, I know a shortcut to what you really want to get to. I know where the whippoorwill is singing, and I can show you." Now the librarian looked up and saw that the night was passing quickly, and if she didn't hurry, she was going to miss her chance at seeing and hearing something she had never before. And so she agreed to follow Coyote. Now Coyote headed off at a full trot across that field. And that librarian was running and trying to keep up. In fact, she was running so fast she fell in a gopher hole and skinned open one of her knees. She got up and tried to follow Coyote again. He turned around and said, "What's the matter with you? Can't you keep up?" And Coyote was off at a full trot, that librarian trying to keep up, trying to get to something she really wanted. But by the time she got to the field where that whippoorwill was singing, why, morning had come. The whippoorwill was gone. So was Coyote. He was off yodeling another song in another field. That librarian had missed her chance. She turned and headed for home, covered in mosquito bites and burrs and one very skinned up knee. But it was many years later, when she was much wiser and older, she realized what had happened that night. She realized that we all have many paths that we can take to get to something that we really want. We have to stay true to that path and embrace that journey. But while we're on that journey to finding something new, we have to keep our eye out for Coyote. Now, that's a story that was told on a CD that's on your list. It was told in a traditional Mohican story told by Bill Miller on a CD called The Red Road, and that CD is the first item that you see on your list, and I hope you'll engage with that again. My point to this story for you, no, that's probably not a children's story that you might tell in a story time. I tell it to my students in my college office all the time, because we can't miss a chance at something new. We can't turn and say no to that. We can't always follow those things that are familiar, even though it's more comfortable. So here's the other side of the coin. When we push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, not only do we model for our young patrons how to do that and to take a risk and try something new, but what happens in our brains is that motivation increases when we do this. It also changes the way we feel in our brains about productivity. We get excited. So it might be a little stressful. You might feel a little anxious trying something brand new in a story time, but that anxiety can be funneled into something exciting, and that productivity will show up in your story time. It also has been proven by brain science that when we push ourselves outside of our comfort zone just a little, why, we get happier, because more endorphins and epinephrine are released in our brain, and it makes us happy. So I hope that you'll try some of the ideas I'm going to present to you today in this webinar and push yourself outside of that comfort zone a little bit and feel how happy you will feel doing that, and know how happy your young patrons will be trying something new right alongside of you. So in honor of pushing ourselves and stretching and growing, there's a quote right smack dab in the middle of the first page of your outline. And I'm going to read that, and then we're going to do our first activity that you might open a story time with or do in the middle of one, or any time for that fact. So here's the quote. This is by Pauline Kieser, who is a journalist, and she said, "Continuity gives us roots. Change gives us branches, letting us stretch and grow and reach new heights." So we're going to stretch and we're going to grow in this webinar and hopefully reach some new heights in how you feel about what you present in story time. So I want you to get up in your office, and we're going to do the first song. All the songs are in your packet and the words, and of course you're going to have the archived recording of this webinar to go back to and watch again if you need to. So get up with me, and we're going to do this first song. Okay, it's one that I made up in the middle of a story time when I had wiggly kids. Have you ever done that? Just made something up on the spot that you needed? That's that creativity when we push beyond our comfort zone. So it goes like this. Ready? I can reach up to the sky. We're reaching up real high. I can touch the ground. And I do a froggy touch to the ground. Kids love doing that. And we bounce a little bit as frogs. Put my hands upon my hips, turn myself around, one hand up and one hand down, give it a stretch, do the other side. And here's the risk-taking part, shake the hand of my new friend, give them a high five. Right? So I'm going to do it a little bit quicker. Let me stand back a little because I'm getting cut off there on the screen. So we're going to reach up. I can reach up to the sky. And then we're going down into the froggy pose. I can touch the ground. Put my hands upon my hips. Turn myself around. One hand up and one hand down. Do the other side. Shake the hand of my new friend. Give him a high five. So when you do this with kids, it's a great one to start with. It's also a great one to do in the middle if they're getting kind of wiggly, but it asks them to turn to somebody they may not know very well, shake their hand, give them a high five. And so you're asking them to step out of their comfort zone too. All right, so that's the first song. I have a few more songs at the end of our time. So what I would love for you to do is, those of you who've been on webinars with me, this will be a review for you. Those who have never been on a webinar with me, this might be new, and there's links again for you to go to get this information again. First thing that I want to remind everybody of is that every child ready to read has 5 practices. 5 practices that we say should be in every story time. Now, these 5 practices are ones that are going to help students grow and learn in language and literacy, and we do that by adding them all to our story times. So Cathy has that up on the screen right now. It's also in your packet. There's also a website that will take you to Every Child Ready to Read website, so you can read more about the 5 practices as a review in every story time. There should be talking, of course, right? You're going to be reading books, telling stories, singing songs, and hopefully engaging those little ones so they're using lots of their language too. There should be singing of songs, and on your handout there's all the reasons why, and in your packet there's actually a 2-page chart for why and how to engage in these 5 practices as well. The third one is to do playing or acting out in story and song. The fourth one is reading. You reading to them and them reading as well, depending on their level, of course. And then finally, writing. So those are the 5 practices. And when you see the writing category, we know that some of our little ones in infant or toddler story times may not have those letter symbols and that print on paper yet. But we also know that all small and large motor skills are a precursor to being able to write and make those letters later. So those writing activities can be craft activities, manipulation activities. So those are the 5 practices. And again, there's a chart that goes into way more detail in your handouts that you can take a look at later. But when I plan a story time, I always plan all 5 of those in the story time, and so I'll be presenting all 5 in this webinar as well. The second handout that Cathy's going to bring up on the screen and share with you is a storytime planner that I created to help librarians kind of put it together. So put all those 5 practices into your story time. And if you plan it out using this planner, you're not going to forget one of the 5 practices. It's going to remind you to make sure that you have all 5 of those in your story time. And so I hope you'll use that planner, and maybe that'll help you in the future as you're planning and using the 5 practices. All right, so let's get started with our very first story. And I chose a very out-of-the-box author for this first story. He's my favorite author for storytelling because he is a storyteller himself, and his name is Robert Munsch. I gave you the link to his website. You should go and read his story. He's an incredibly out-of-the-box author who has an incredible story about how he grew up and didn't think he was going to be successful at anything until he started telling stories at a daycare that he was working at in college. And he saw that he was pretty good at it, but other people noticed that he was really good at it. And his boss at that daycare encouraged him to start writing those stories down. And now we have 54 incredible Robert Munsch books. So I want you to know that if you're feeling a little nervous about telling a story, not using the book, or you want some really wonderful stories to use in your story times, he hits just about every theme you can imagine. And here's the wonderful thing about his stories. One, he didn't write them first and tell them later. Robert Munsch has a rule of telling a story 100 times to 100 audiences before he ever writes them down in new books. He publishes about 2 new books a year, and hopefully that will continue so we have more of his wonderful work. I tell a lot of his stories because they are very tellable. Mortimer is one that I've done in another webinar, and you can go to the archives and look for that one. Another story that I love to tell to a little bit older storytime groups is this one, Purple, Green, and Yellow. And the one that I'm going to share with you today that I absolutely love for this time of year because it's a wintertime story is Thomas's Snowsuit. So you may have heard of this before. You may know Robert Munch's work. If you don't, you need to get acquainted with it really fast, so you have some wonderful ideas for your story times. I'm not going to read the book, but it's a wonderful way to begin, right? By reading the book. I'm not going to take that time to read through the pages of this story. I want to show you how I would go from the pages of this story into how I would tell it with an audience of young kids, and then give you some support materials for retelling that story and backing it up with a writing activity. All right, so Thomas's snowsuit, and I'm going to stand up to tell this one. And there's parts of it that you can join in with as well. One day, Thomas's mother had gone shopping. She came home with a brand new snowsuit for Thomas. It was a brown snowsuit, and when she showed Thomas that snowsuit, he looked up at it and he said, "That is the ugliest snowsuit I have ever seen. And if you think I'm going to wear that, you've got another thing coming." Thomas's mother just looked down at him and said, "We'll see about that." The next morning, Thomas got up for school. And when he was ready to go walk to school, his mother said, "Now, Thomas, put on your new snowsuit." And Thomas looked up at his mother and he said, "No." His mother said, "Thomas, put on your new snowsuit." And Thomas said, "No." His mother said, "Yes." Now they're joining in with you, right? You encourage him. Thomas said, pause, "No." His mother said, "Yes." Until finally his mother was so frustrated. She picked up Thomas in one hand, she picked up his snowsuit in the other, and they wrestled around and they wrestled around and they wrestled around and they wrestled around until poof, Thomas was in his snowsuit. Now, it was not only ugly, but it was a really noisy snowsuit. And Thomas walked out of the house like this. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The bus came and the door opened and Thomas went up the steps of the bus. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. He walked down the aisle. Whoosh, whoosh. And all the kids on the bus laughed and said, "Thomas, you've got a really noisy snowsuit." He sat down. Whoosh. When they got to school, well, Thomas went off of the bus, whoosh, 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 into the classroom, whoosh, 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 and he took off that ugly brown snowsuit and he hung it up. Well, recess came that day. And when recess came, all the students in Thomas's class jumped into their snowsuits and they ran out the door to go play in the snow, but not Thomas. The teacher said, "Thomas, don't you want to go out for recess?" Thomas said, "No." She said, "Thomas, you have to go out for recess. Now put on your snowsuit." Thomas said, "No." The teacher said, "Yes, Thomas, put on your snowsuit." Thomas said, "No." The teacher said, "Yes." Until finally that teacher was so frustrated, she picked up Thomas in one hand. She picked up his brown snowsuit in the other, and they wrestled around and they wrestled around and they wrestled around and they wrestled around until poof. When they got done wrestling, why, the teacher had on Thomas's snowsuit. Thomas had on the teacher's dress. Well, the teacher looked at Thomas and Thomas looked at the teacher and he started to giggle, but she said, "Thomas, you have to give me back my dress." Well, the teacher and Thomas wrestled around and wrestled around and wrestled around and wrestled around until when they were done, why, the snowsuit and the teacher's dress was tied in a great big knot on the floor, and there was Thomas and the teacher standing in their underwear. Well, after all that commotion, the principal came into the door and said, "What is the problem in here?" and saw the teacher and Thomas standing in their underwear. The teacher said, "It's Thomas. He won't put on his snowsuit." Well, that principal got that big principal finger out and got close to Thomas and tried to use that big principal voice. And he said, "Thomas, you have to put on your snowsuit." And Thomas said, "No." And the principal said, "Yes, Thomas, you put on your snowsuit." Thomas said, "No." The principal said, "Yes." Thomas said, "No." The principal said, "Yes." And that principal picked up the teacher, picked up Thomas, and the mess on the floor, and they wrestled around, and they all wrestled around, and they wrestled around, and they wrestled around. When poof, when they were done wrestling, why, the teacher had on the principal's suit. The principal had on the teacher's dress. Thomas was still standing there in his underwear. Well, the teacher and the principal started to argue. And the principal said, "You give me back my suit." And the teacher said, "I'm not giving you back your suit until you give me back my dress." They were arguing about who was going to give up their clothing first. When Thomas heard the sound of his friends outside on recess, they said, "Thomas, come out and play." Thomas jumped into his snowsuit, jumped into his boots, and ran outside to play with his friends. When he came back in from recess, the principal and the teacher were still arguing about their clothes. Thomas picked up the principal, picked up the teacher, and they all wrestled around and wrestled around and wrestled around and wrestled around until, poof, when they were done wrestling, the teacher was back in her dress. The principal was back in his suit. Thomas started taking off his snowsuit. The day after that, the principal quit his job and he moved to a nice warm place in Florida where they never had to wear snowsuits. And that's a story called Thomas's Snowsuit. All right, you guys, so I changed it a little bit, right? And so as Robert Munch probably did, the 100 times that he told that story, they changed just a little bit. When you write them down, then they become, more static. So you can read that book, but you can also put the book down and tell that story. And all of Robert Munch's stories are very easy to learn. There's lots of repetition. There's rooms for adding songs and movement. And I added that back and forth of no, yes, so that the kids sitting in front of you could join in with that part. They also join in with the wrestle around. In the book, Munch says they had a great big argument. And I didn't want to say that, so I said they wrestled around because it was a little gentler and I could add that motion that all the kids could join in with. So I have a few activities to show you to go along with this. And one of the tools that I love to use for puppets and for little ones grabbing it easily, believe it or not, are spatulas that I got at the dollar store, right? And because they're metal spatulas, then it's easy to put magnets on things that you want to stick to them and change them out very easily. So you can have the students, or I say students, you can have your children in story time tell the story again. And all I did was take the pages of the book, put them on my copy machine, and then blew them up a little bit bigger so they fit the size of the spatula. But here's Thomas. So you can tell that story about, and I didn't do a picture of Thomas's mother, but you certainly could have Thomas's mother on one of these as well, that after they first wrestle around, she wants him to put that snowsuit on, then Thomas has that snowsuit on. And when he gets to school, then the teacher has on her dress and she wants Thomas to put on that snowsuit, so they wrestle around, they wrestle around, and they wrestle around. And the kids can actually change out what happens in the story. So the teacher ends up wearing Thomas's snowsuit. Thomas ends up wearing the teacher's dress until the principal comes in, right? And those outfits change again, sorry. That's why you need other little people in the room to hold these up. So the outfits change again until the principal ends up wearing the teacher's dress and she has on his suit. And then they wrestle around one last time until everybody's back in their clothing again. So that's a really wonderful way to do it. The other way that you can do this, with the magnets anyway, cookie sheet, right? And you can stick the characters on the back of the cookie sheet on one side, and when their outfits show up, then there's Thomas's snowsuit, right? Here's the teacher. And I did this way because it's really interchangeable and active, but you could do this at feltboard. This was really easy to copy and then put a magnet on the back of it. So it didn't take me a lot of time to create these crops for retelling the story after you've read it, maybe told it once, or have the student or have the kids come up and tell that story again. So there's the cookie sheet version of that. And then of course, and when they change their outfits, you can just pull those off when that story gets to that part where they end up rumbling and end up with each other's clothing on, okay? So that's one idea for extending Thomas's snowsuit for a little retelling. And that's the part of the talking in those 5 practices that's really powerful, when the kids can come up and tell that story again, or do it in groups of 3 or 4 if you add the mother character to it. I also went out looking for other related writing activities, and I search on the internet just like you guys do. And I found a site that is called Mama's Learning Corner. Really wonderful site. She offers most of her stuff for free. I don't know how people do this, but they do. And so she came up, and these are in your handout, with a matching game for winter clothing, right? And so the words are on there. Oops, sorry, upside down. The words are on there for mittens, so they can see the word and the picture. And there's 4 pages of choices. So with a matching game, if you have really little ones, you're not going to want to give them that many choices, but maybe the older kids could handle more of them. So lots of ways that you can use these. If I'm in a story time and I want them as a group to do some of this as a writing activity, I could pass them out to everyone, and you had to find somebody who had the same picture of yours and then say what those are. So it can be a game that you use in story time. It can be something you send home. So they can be doing this matching game at home by just copying off the sheets. It can be a way for you to engage them right afterwards and have these all set up at tables and do that matching game. They can do it with partners, right? So it's just a wonderful add-on, and all of those handouts are in your packet. So I hope you'll use that as a wintertime activity that'll go along with Thomas's snowsuit. Right. And I haven't been checking the chat box to see if you guys have questions or not. But Cathy, will you alert me to that if there are?
Yep, I'll keep you posted.
Okay, great. All right. So Thomas's snowsuit, great. And again, that list of munch books, every single one of them are tellable. Every single one of them make them a little bit more comfortable to push out of your comfort zone. Maybe put that book down and tell it as Robert Munsch intended it to originally be shared. Okay, so Robert Munsch. All right, so moving on, I want to talk about getting out of your comfort zone or working out of the box when it comes to public domain folk tales. We know that those old folk tales are still very popular and they still work. And so I use them all the time. And I want to share with you a few different ideas and how to go out of the box and out of your comfort zone, sharing those ideas as telling stories. So in your resources, you'll see that I have sent you to a few different places to kind of search for those stories. And one of the greatest places to search for public domain folklore is something called Project Gutenberg, searching for public domain folklore, and that site is on your resources. You can go there and put a theme in, put a title in, and they will give you all the places in their research where that public domain story has been shared or where it shows up. I also I'm going to be sharing a story that came off of my CD, so you can listen to that again. If you go to my website, storybetold.com, a little box will come down. You put your email in there and you can get a free download of this MP3 and listen to all my Michigan stories again. I won't do anything with your email, I promise, except maybe send you some news about 2 times a year. The other source is that in my book, Telling Stories, which is also on my website, there are 16 public domain folk tales in the back of this book that are bare bones and very easy to use. So I want you to know that those old stories still work and we should still use them because the lessons in them are strong and wonderful. So in this part, I want to share with you, not the story itself, but some ideas that came out of pushing out of my comfort zone and trying to expand my storytelling. It's a story called The Talkative Turtle. I've told it in another webinar probably 2 years ago. I'm going to grab my props so I can introduce you to Turtle, but I want to tell you what came out of it. Okay? In your handouts, you will find this story, the bare bones version of it that came out of the back of our book. You will also find directions for making turtle puppets in there that you can do to add to your story time. I love puppets and I make handmade puppets all the time. Or you can have families make those puppets and take them home so that they can continue to tell stories at home. So I tell this talkative turtle story. Basically, it's the turtle, and you may know it because there's so many versions of it. Turtle who loves to talk and never stops talking. Winter comes, and in my version, his friends, the geese, are going to fly down south, and he wants to go with them. They say turtles can't fly, but one of the geese thinks of a way to take him with them and gets a big, long piece of driftwood, a stick, and the goose bites one end and turtle bites the other end, and they start flying down south. Well, turtle can't stop talking, and he opens up his mouth to say something, and he falls off of the end of that stick. He lands in the lake. He cracks his shell. So turtles now have cracks in their shell. But turtle learns the lesson. Sometimes it's okay to talk. Sometimes it's better not to. So that's basically the story. Well, several summers ago, I had a show that I was performing for summer reading, and it was called Juggling Turtles. And in that show, I told the turtle story, but while the geese were getting ready to fly down south, I had them doing aerobics and jumping jacks so I could get those little ones involved. And one of the things I had the geese do was something called goose yoga. Well, it stuck in my story times, and I realized that these yoga moves are a really wonderful way to begin your story times, get them focused, really wonderful way to end your story time, to bring them back down again, or you can add it into stories as a way to get them up and moving while you're still telling the story. So I'm going to show you those yoga moves right now that I had the geese do. And then we'll talk about another game that came out this particular summer reading program. All right, so get up again. Aren't you glad I'm having you move in your offices? Get up again and I'll show you how this went. Right? So in this part of the story, the geese were getting their wings strong. So I want you to get your goose wings up like this. And they did a whole series of yoga moves to strengthen their wings so that they could make that trip down south. So the very first move was called Goose Warrior. And the second move was taking your wings up to the sky, so stretching this way. Bringing your wings back down again. Spread your feet out about shoulder width. Get a good strong stance, and we're just going to bend at the waist. And I told those little ones they could touch the floor if they wanted to. Come back up. Now we're going to do Goose Warrior pose. You can't really see my feet, but I'm going to have one foot straight in front and bend the knee. I'm going to plant the back foot on an angle to kind of stabilize myself. And this is warrior pose. Wings up, warrior pose. After we did that on both legs, so do the other side, right? I had them do something called the Goose Garuda. So you're going to point your foot to the right, plant your foot and back like before, and we're going to spread our wings out this time and just tilt in a triangle and touch our foot. You can bend your knee on that one. And then we're going to slant to the left this time. Point your foot this way, plant your foot on a 45-degree angle in the back, and bend down and touch that toe. So the final one that I used was called the goose tree, where you stand on one leg for a little while, and then spread your legs out again, hands on the floor, into something that's called downward dog in yoga. But then I had everybody fold themselves up on the floor, and we all became turtles at the end of this. Okay, so that ended up in this story. And after that, I found that if I started my story times and ended my story times with those yoga moves, everybody calmed down and got ready to listen, and everybody was ready to transition to something else. So if you don't want to start with a song, or you want to start the continuity of having your story time groups come in and you do a little bit of yoga and maybe a little bit of breathing, little ones are natural yogis. I just found when I did this that they just loved it, and they're just natural and bending themselves up that way. So see what you think about that and see how you feel about it. It's a wonderful way to add in some movement to story, but also, again, beginning and ending of those story times. If you don't want to do that same welcome song or ending song, you could have the practice of doing yoga. So that summer, I also started adding group games into my story time or my programs. And one of them that went with this particular theme with the turtle was something called the lily pad. So Kath, if you'll bring that picture up, I can't show you in my office how to do this without a group, but if you'll bring that lily pad lap ball picture up, then I can show everybody how this worked.
I'll just jump in and say sorry for the confusion, everyone. The 32-page packet was not viewable for the first part of the webinar, but now you should be able to access it at the link, so you should be good.
Oh, okay. I'm glad that came up. So
Yep.
this is a picture of that summer when I was doing juggling turtles. And this is a really wonderful way to get all the members of your storytime group to sort of break out of their comfort zone a little bit. And they don't have to touch each other. It's all toes in the middle. And then eventually hands behind them. Although some little ones won't put their hands behind them, and that's okay. They're still learning how to stabilize. You can see a few of them have their hands behind them, but not all of them. So these were the turtles, right? And they were just blow-up balls that I got off of Oriental Trading Company. Got a whole packet of blow-up balls, and these were the turtles. And what the game does is it starts a turtle on somebody's lap, and the goal is to roll that turtle all the way around the lily pad without it falling off. If it falls off of somebody's lap, then you have to start over where it started, the person it started with. And they can't use their hands, but they can use their knees and their feet to get that turtle all the way around. Well, they loved this game. And so I started adding it in as well to get groups to kind of cooperate and coordinate with each other. So let me show you what else I did. And this is something I used to do in environmental ed back in the days of group games, but it works really well if you add it to a theme in your story time, or you just want your group to sort of collaborate and get together with a common goal of getting these balls all the way around their laps. Every age can do this, so you're not gonna dismiss anybody from your group, right? So I started using smaller balls. So then they did this one. And then they did this one, and depending on your group, then they did the smallest ball. That's usually for the older kids. So group games are a wonderful way to add to your story times. Whether you add them as a theme or a way to begin or a way to move in the middle, it's lovely collaboration and coordination. And you're working on those large motor skills, which, believe it or not, are going to help them be better readers and writers later on. So it's a great way to do that. So the second public domain story that I want to share with you today is probably one you've heard of before, and it's called The Bear with the Stumpy Tail. Or on my CD, it's called How Bear Lost His Tail. It's in that whole genre of how and why or pork-wise stories. I love this story, but I've made my own version of it, right? So you can listen to it again on my CD. You can search it in the public domain sources and find many, many versions of this story. So I'm going to get up and tell this story with the participation that I've added. The reason I tell this one is it gives people in my programs the opportunity to play. And if you remember, that's one of the 5 practices. So they're going to play by joining in and do some movement, but we're going to do that together as a group so that if they're feeling a little shy, they can join in. And if they just want to watch and listen, that's okay too. So I'm going to get up and show you this story. I use some props for this one. I usually have Bear, whose tail is very little and stumpy, and we talk about what bears' tails look like. And then I tell them that a long, long time ago, Bear did not look the way that he does today. In fact, a very, very long time ago, Bear had the longest, the bushiest, the most beautiful tail of all the animals in the forest. And Bear knew how beautiful his tail was because he would brag about it all the time. So this is the story. And you need to practice your parts before we begin. So I want you to pretend that you have a beautiful long tail. And I'll show you another prop that I sometimes use. And this is going out of your comfort zone a little bit too, right? I tied a fuzzy tail to the bottom of a sash so that I could have this as my own long tail while they're pretending. You could have these tails available for everyone in your story time. So there's that long tail, right? So for the purpose of this storytelling, we're just going to act that out. So I want you to grab your tail from behind you, right, and pull it around. Pretend it's really long and flap it over your paw. This is your paw. We're going to take our brush and comb and we're going to brush that tail. Ready? We're going to brush it. So they're acting and playing right now, right? Brush it. And we're going to brush it. We're going to get some mousse and gel and spray it on our tail. Sound effects are wonderful. And then we're going to rub it in. Ooh. And we're going to fluff it up. And we're going to hold it out like we're incredibly proud of it. And then I want you to repeat after me. You ready? Don't you like my tail? Don't you like my tail? Isn't this the best tail you've ever seen? Isn't this the best tail you've ever seen? That's your part. A long time ago, Bear was the animal in the forest who had the longest, the bushiest, the most beautiful tail of all the animals. And Bear knew how beautiful his tail was. Every day, he would walk out into the forest. Gonna add some song. Dum dum be dum, dum dum be dum, dum dum be dum. And they're gonna sing with you eventually. It didn't matter what animal he ran into. It could have been chipmunk. It could have been raccoon. It could have been coyote himself. Bear always did the same thing. He would stick that tail in that animal's face and he would say, you know your parts, don't you like my tail? Isn't this the best tail you've ever seen? Now, usually, whatever animal he was talking to would say, yes, Bear, you have a beautiful tail. You tell us about your tail every day. But usually that animal would walk away because everyone was tired of hearing about Bear's tail. One winter, Bear went looking for a place to do what he does every winter. And what's that? Sleep, hibernate. Some of them will have that vocabulary, right? Yes. Bears love to sleep or hibernate in the winter. And he found a great big hollow log and he headed in to take that long nap. Dum dum be dum, dum dum be dum, dum dum be dum. He laid down in that log and wrapped that tail around him, and Bear went to sleep. While that bear was sleeping that winter, all the animals in the forest who didn't sleep in the winter, they had a meeting. They got together in a great big circle. You see, they were going to teach that bear a lesson so he never bragged about his tail again. Now, they chose two animals to help with the plan. They chose a tiny little fish called a minnow. Yep, there she is. And they chose an animal by the name of Coyote because he was really good at tricky plans. You see, what they had planned to do when Bear woke up was to lure him out onto the ice where Coyote would be fishing and teach that bear how to fish with his tail. Only they had more in store for Bear. One beautiful spring morning, Bear must have known that it was spring because he woke up and he said, "Ugh, I'm a little hungry." And with that, he got up and out of that hollow log and he grabbed his tail and brought it around and saw that it needed some attention. He laid it over his paw and he brushed it and he brushed it. He put some mousse on it. He rubbed it in. Ooh. And he fluffed that tail up and headed out into the forest to look for something to eat. More music. Dum dum be dum, dum dum be dum, dum dum be dum. Well, he got to the edge of the lake because we all know what bears love to eat that live in the lake. That's right, fish. And when Bear got to the edge of the lake, it was so early in the spring that that lake was still frozen all the way across. But he looked out, and in the middle of that lake, on the ice, was Coyote. And Bear watched to see what Coyote was doing, and he saw that Coyote pulled his tail up out of the water, and there was a huge fish on the end of it, and Bear's eyes got real big. He hoped Coyote would share his catch with him. He got his tail out and he headed across that ice. Dum dum be dum, dum dum be dum. He got to the place where Coyote was fishing. He took that tail of his and stuck it right in Coyote's face. And you know what he said. Don't you like my tail? Isn't this the best tail you've ever seen? Coyote pushed that tail out of his face. Boom. He said, why, hello, Bear. I see you woke up. Yes, Coyote, I woke up hungry. Can I have one of your fish? Now, Coyote knew this was the moment they had been waiting for. And Coyote said, no, Bear, I'm not going to give you my fish, but I'll teach you how to fish with your tail. Bear said, do that with my tail? And Coyote said, if you're hungry enough, Bear, you'll go fishing with your tail. Now, Coyote leaned down and picked up a tiny little fish they had picked to help with that plan. It was minnow. And gave it to Bear and said, I want you to put this minnow on the end of your tail. And Bear took his tail and attached that minnow to the end of it. And then Coyote showed Bear how to stuff his tail down that hole in the ice. Now, after Bear had stuffed his tail down the hole in the ice, he looked up and saw that Coyote was gone. He had picked up his fish and trotted off across the ice and left Bear out there all by himself. Well, that little minnow on the end of his tail was being very patient and quiet. She wasn't moving one single fin. Bear thought it was silly to stand up and wait, so he sat down. And still nothing happened on the bottom of his tail. Bear got sleepy. He fell asleep again. And while he was sleeping on the ice, all that ice in that fishing hole started to freeze up right around his tail. He stayed asleep for so long that all the ice in that fishing hole froze solid around his tail. And that's when that little minnow started moving around. She was whipping around on the end of Bear's tail. She attracted the eye of another fish called a largemouth bass. And while that minnow was flipping around, the bass came in and grabbed that minnow and grabbed Bear's tail. Well, he woke up all right. He shot straight up off of the ice and he came back down. Whoa! And when he landed, he was pretty shook up. He got up and brushed the snow and ice off of his fur. And because he was shook up, he thought it would help him if he hugged his tail. But he didn't grab it on the first try. He grabbed it again. No tail on the second try. Bear looked over his shoulder and he saw that his tail was gone. He looked down in that frozen fishing hole and there was a stump of his tail. It had torn right off when he jumped up. Poor Bear ran across that ice. He hid in the woods until his tail healed up just a little bit. And we know now that bears only have a tiny little stumpy tail. But when Bear came out of the woods and he saw the other animals, well, he had learned a lesson. He didn't brag about his tail anymore because he didn't have one to brag about. But when he met another animal in the woods, why, he would talk for a while, and then he would stop and he would listen. He would talk for a while, and then he would stop and listen to what they had to say. And the animals of that forest spent a lot more time with Bear after that. All right, so it's a public domain story that I took and added the song. I added the repeating words, don't you like my tail? So this is how we sort of take a very skeleton story and build it into a story that we feel comfortable telling, that's going to engage those kids in those 5 practices and get them involved in playing and acting out part of the story without scaring them too much. So some of the props that I used in this one, this is actually a puppet. And I sometimes, when I have a really small group, I'll tell it with Bear, right? And I'll let the kids pull his tail off because they like the feeling of that. It's Velcroed on to his little stump right here. And if you tell it with him as a puppet, you can actually attach, and these are felt minnows. That's a potato chip clip in the side of the largemouth bass, right? And I'll hang that minnow off the end of Bear's tail and let the kids bite that off and then rip that tail off so that they can get that feeling for how Bear lost his tail. The other prop that I showed you, which makes you feel a little silly, but it sure is fun to do this, is to tie that tail around you so they can see your very long tail and show them how to pull it around front and comb it, put the goop on it, and then say those repeating words. Okay, so that's Bear's stumpy tail. All right, I'm in a rolly chair here, and I'm checking our time. Oh, of course, our hour goes by so quickly. Okay, I don't know, Cathy, you tell me if there's people that have questions, should they get a hold of me later so that we don't use time on questions, because I have a little bit more to share.
There's no questions right now.
Okay, good.
But if they have any, they can put in the chat box and I'll try to
Okay, you
squeeze
can
them in
send
at
those
the
to
end.
me, or you guys, you
Yeah.
can email me, of course, and I'll answer. I always say in my webinars, you now have lifelong access to me if you want to call me up and ask me questions about how to execute any of this. Okay. So I want to share 2 new songs with you. Valentine's Day is coming up. You might be thinking what you're going to do for those story times that are close to Valentine's Day. These are 2 songs that I've been singing for a long time, but the way that I went out of the box on this one is that I made up new verses, and I hope you're doing this. You just make up new verses to songs that you've already been singing. So in your packet are 2 pages that have the songs on it. So I want you to pull those out if you want, or just watch me, and then you can do them later. Call me up if you want to sing them together. When I was at camp as a young one, I learned a lot of the songs that end up in my storytime programs. This one's called Skinnamarink Dinky Doo, and some of you may have heard of it before. I added 2 new verses. And I use sign language quite often in my songs because it really helps them engage. Sign language is a wonderful way to communicate for little ones who don't have as many words. If they learn more sign language, they have that as a communication, and they really love learning it. All right. So part of it's sign language. The opening isn't sign language. Okay. So it goes like this: Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink doo. Point to ourselves. And this is love, love you. You probably know this verse. Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink doo. Yes, I do. And this is do. I love you in the morning and in the afternoon. I love you in the evening and underneath the moon. So Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink doo. I love you. Great start. Second verse, I made them up. Just made them up. I needed friendship, right? That was one of our themes, and so I made this up. Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink dand. Sorry, dand. Sorry. You're my friend. This is friend. Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink dand. Until the end. You're my friend in the morning and in the afternoon. You're my friend in the evening and underneath the moon. So Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink dand. You're my friend. I feel like Mr. Rogers. Oh, I shouldn't compare myself. Last verse is I can be happy. Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink dee. I can be happy. Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink dee. It's up to me. I can be happy in the morning and in the afternoon. Happy in the evening and underneath the moon. So Skinnamarink dinky doo, Skinnamarink dee. I can be happy. I added that verse because I saw a lot of kids showing up to programs who didn't look real happy. And I want them all to know that it can be their choice to be happy or not. And so that really helped with that. Another song that I've been singing for a long time that you can add verses to is a song called Love Grows. And it's in your packet, and it goes like this. Love grows 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 4 by 4. Love grows around in a circle, comes back knocking on your front door. I added more verses. Friends grow 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 4 by 4. Friends grow around in a circle, come back knocking on your front door. And then I have joy, same as happy, grows 1 by 1, 2 by 2, same. And then hope, which is an interesting sign language. You do the D in sign language to your head, and then you have your hands facing each other, and this is hope. Hope grows 1 by 1, 2 by 2. So the choices are infinite in terms of, and they can come up with what would the next verse be? What else do they want to grow, you know? So it can be carrots grow, 1 by 1. It can be a lot of things that grow, but they can come up and give you some of those or offer some of those ideas, and you sing the song and it's around in a circle and knocks on your front door. Great way for them to join in using song to build language and literacy. Okay? So let me see. Oh, we're right there, aren't we? Okay. There was another story that I was going to share with you that I will save for another webinar because I do want to share with you this last writing activity. So we talk about writing activities, right? And we know that if we have those really little ones, writing means manipulating. That means sewing, threading, tracing, using materials that are manipulative like clay, like sand, beads, pipe cleaners, all those things to start working with the small motor skills. And that's going to lead to the ability to write print on paper later on. If you have those older kids, then you can start doing bigger writing activities. So I always do one that has a little bit of both. So Valentine's Day is coming up. And this is a very, very simple way to get them into a writing activity. I have slips of paper on my lap. For everyone in the group, I ask their name and write it down. So their name will go on the top. I'm going to put Jen. And I ask them, what do you love? What do you love? And it can be somebody, a person, it can be an animal, something they love to do, an object they love, a feeling they love. It can be any of those, and you might want to give them some examples. But I'm going to put down, I'm going to be the first volunteer in the group, and I'm going to say, I love my mom. And you would write down, I love my mom. So there's print on paper, right? They may not be able to read those words, but you're going to send them off for Valentine's Day with a piece of paper that's a heart so they can draw a picture of the thing that they loved, and you're going to send them with this together. I love my mom. They're going to draw a picture of them and their mom, something they do together, and those would go together. When they get done drawing their picture and they hand this in to you, I want you to think about your library and have a place where you can make a display. It might be a great big heart, and you're putting them all up there. So this is a group writing activity. Sorry, oops, sorry. I also, where did I put it? There they are. I also like to string clothesline across the library and then put their offerings up on that clothesline. So it would be a beautiful way to decorate for Valentine's Day. You can have them put stickers on their drawing if you want. But you can do a clothesline and then put up all of their what do you love all across, and they can come in and find theirs and read it, see that picture to reinforce it, or they can look at all those pictures. But every student will leave having participated in a group activity, but also a writing activity where you can have them write this if they're old enough, but if they're not, you're going to write that down, give them a heart to draw a picture of what it was they said they loved, and put those together either on a clothesline or a big display in your library for Valentine's Day, although this works any time of year, right? So let me see where we're at. We're at 3:01. So I want to say this to you as a final. I want to tell you that I know how nerve-wracking it can be to try something new. And a lot of times we're grabbing those stories or we're grabbing those activities that we've done for years that really work for us. But I encourage you with all my heart to push outside of that comfort zone, to model for those little ones that they can do that too. And it'll help you get happier. It'll increase your motivation. It'll help you feel more creative and keep your job fresh as well. So thank you for attending the webinar today. I hope you got at least one idea that you can take away and use right away. I hope you use your handouts to go back and then get a hold of me if you need any help with anything at all. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Jen. So thank you so much.
You're
Really
welcome.
appreciate your time, and you're channeling Mr. Rogers. I think today is a perfect day. Any day is a perfect day to channel Mr. Rogers.
You betcha.
Up on the screen is the links to today's survey and the handouts, and you can now see the full 32-page packet.
Sorry about that, you guys.
Yeah, please do take a minute to go to the survey. It's not very long. We appreciate your feedback. Links to the recording will be sent to the link that you registered with. I cannot send it to additional links. I'm going to have to use the recording links, the registration links. So please do check your spam mail if you don't see that recording by the end of the day tomorrow. It takes a little while for Zoom to get the recording and then for us to get it out through our registration system. So I appreciate everyone's time today, And especially, Jen, we appreciate your sharing all your great knowledge with us.
You bet. Thanks for asking me. I love doing it. And so, and I'm better live, you guys.
I know.
So if you want to bring me in to do any of these trainings live, you certainly are welcome to do that. Thank you, Cathy, for having
For
me on
sure.
another webinar. I love doing these.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day and a great rest of your week.
See you
Thanks.
later.